It was the winter of 1594, and the small German town of Brandenburg lay silent beneath a veil of snow. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, the streets so quiet that even the faint creak of a wooden cartwheel could echo through the fog. Dawn had barely broken, but the square was already full. Men in heavy coats, women clutching their children, and priests holding crosses, all waiting. At the center of the square stood a wooden scaffold, its beams dark and slick with frost. The rope hung motionless, stiffened by the cold. A single crow perched on the post, its feathers black as ink against the white world around it. They were all waiting for Anna Ebeler, the woman they called die Unsterbliche, the immortal. She had once been a healer, known for her kindness, her quiet smile, and her strange gift of mending wounds that no physician could cure. But when the harvest failed, when the river froze too early, and when the mayor's child died of fever despite her herbs, the whispers began. Witch, cursed woman, servant of the devil. Now as the church bells tolled 6 times, 2 soldiers dragged her from the dungeon below the town hall. Chains clinked around her wrists and the cold bit through the thin linen of her torn dress. Her feet were bare, red against the snow. Every step left a faint trace of blood behind. The crowd stirred when they saw her. Some crossed themselves. Others spat. A few only stared in silence, uncertain whether they were watching a sinner or something far more terrifying. Anna lifted her head, her breath fogging in the frozen air. Her face was pale but calm. Her hair, once golden, was tangled and darkened with soot. She looked toward the scaffold as if she had already seen it many times before, because she had. This was not her first execution. The first time had been 2 weeks earlier. She had been hanged for witchcraft after being accused of summoning storms. Her heart had stopped. The priest had declared her dead. But when they went to cut her down, her body convulsed and she began to breathe again. The second time they tied her to a pyre. The fire had raged for nearly an hour, the smoke thick and choking, yet her body did not burn as it should have. When the flames died, she was found alive, her skin blistered but her eyes open. And so now, this was the 3rd attempt. The people of Brandenburg had gathered not just to see justice served, but to see if she would finally die. The executioner, a large man named Johann Keller, stood at the foot of the scaffold. His eyes, usually cold and unshaken, carried something new that morning, unease. He had performed dozens of executions, but never one like this. Never one where the condemned had outlasted death itself. He climbed the steps, his boots thudding against the wood. The sound echoed across the square like drumbeats. When Anna reached the top, she turned to face him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The crowd held its breath, then quietly she said, "You can take my breath, Johann, but not my soul." Her voice was weak but steady. Keller swallowed hard. "May God forgive you," he murmured, but she shook her head. "No," she whispered, "may he forgive you." The priest stepped forward, clutching a cross in trembling hands. His words carried over the wind. "Anna Ebeler, you stand condemned of witchcraft, of consorting with the devil, and of bringing ruin upon this town. Do you have any final words before your soul meets its judgment?" Anna's gaze drifted over the crowd. She saw faces she recognized, her neighbors, the baker who once bought her herbs, the woman she had helped deliver a child, now glaring at her as if she were poison. Her voice broke when she spoke. "I healed your children," she said softly. "I prayed with you when your crops failed. I asked for nothing in return. And now you do this." A man shouted from the crowd. "You brought the fever upon us." Another woman screamed, "The devil keeps you alive." The priest raised his hand for silence, but the noise swelled until it became a wave of hatred. Anna closed her eyes. The wind howled through the square, carrying the smell of smoke and frost. Then, without another word, the executioner placed the noose around her neck. The rough rope scraped her skin. She looked up toward the sky, gray, endless, indifferent. The priest began to pray. The crowd murmured the Lord's Prayer, though few knew whether they prayed for her soul or for their own safety. The trapdoor creaked beneath her feet. The sound made several in the crowd flinch. Then, silence. Keller pulled the lever. The platform dropped. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of the rope tightening. The body jerked. Then it went still. The priest stepped forward, eyes closed, and whispered the final words. "May her soul find rest." The crowd began to disperse. The wind picked up, blowing snow across the square. It seemed over. But an hour later, when Keller climbed the scaffold to cut the body down, he froze. Anna's fingers twitched. Her lips moved. Her chest rose ever so slightly. He stumbled backward, pale as chalk. She's breathing. The priest turned sharply, disbelief in his eyes. That's impossible, he said. Yet when he touched her throat, he felt it. The faint, stubborn pulse of life. A murmur rippled through the square. Those who had not yet left came running back, gasping, whispering, crossing themselves. Some fell to their knees. Others backed away in terror. Anna's eyes opened, glassy but alive. Her lips moved again, and though her voice was only a whisper, those standing closest heard the words. Still, not done. Panic broke out. Someone screamed that she was possessed. Another cried that hell itself had sent her back. The priest dropped his cross. The mayor ordered that the execution continue. If the rope fails, he shouted, then burn her. Let no trace remain. And so they brought firewood. The air filled with the crackle of flames and the smell of smoke. They burned her until her skin blistered and the heat turned the snow beneath her feet into muddy water. But when the fire died down, she was still there, barely alive, her eyes half open, her breath shallow. A soldier vomited at the sight. The crowd, once angry, now trembled in fear. They carried her body to the churchyard, hoping she would finally die in the night. Yet when morning came, a stable boy found her still breathing, her pulse weak but real. The mayor, desperate and shaken, called a council. The priest declared it a test from God. Some said she should be buried alive. Others that she should be left to starve. But Anna's fate was already sealed. She was taken once more to the scaffold, the same one she had hung from twice already. The same one that creaked and moaned under her weight. As Keller adjusted the noose again, his hand shook. He had nightmares of her face every night. He didn't want to do it again, but he had no choice. Please, he whispered to her, voice low enough that no one else could hear. Whatever you are. Forgive me. She looked at him, eyes full of exhaustion and quiet sorrow. You think I want this? She asked. You think I haven't begged for it to end? Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear but from despair. I just can't die. The words chilled him more than the winter air. When the trapdoor opened again, she fell, and the sound of the rope echoed through the square like thunder. Her body went limp. Hours passed. The snow continued to fall. Night came, cold and silent. But before dawn, a faint cough echoed from the scaffold. The guard who had been posted there ran for the priest, shouting that the witch had risen again. By the time the priest arrived, Anna was sitting up. Her neck bruised, her face ghostly pale, but she was alive. Her eyes turned toward him, hollow, weary. Why? Won't it stop? She whispered. The priest could not answer. He dropped to his knees, crossing himself over and over. Lord have mercy. What are you? Anna's eyes filled with tears. I was only ever human, she said softly. But maybe that's what makes this so cruel. The priest stared at her, trembling. If you are human, he whispered, then may God forgive us all. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the snow. The town was quiet again. But beneath that silence, beneath the frost and the fear, Brandenburg was holding its breath. Because everyone knew that by sunset, they would have to try again, and no one, not even Anna, knew if death would come the third time. The longest execution in history had begun. The first day of her final execution began with a sky the color of ash. The snow had stopped falling, but the air hung heavy, like the whole world was holding its breath. The town square, once filled with shouting and chaos, was eerily silent. Even the crows had left. Anna Ebeler still hung from the scaffold, her body motionless, her hair frozen against her neck. The priest had already left. The executioner, Johann Keller, sat nearby with his face buried in his hands. He hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, alive again, gasping for breath, whispering words that made no sense but felt heavier than any prayer. By noon, the mayor arrived with soldiers. She must be buried, he ordered sharply, his voice trembling despite his authority. Before sunset, before anything happens again. But when Keller climbed the steps to cut her down, his knife slipped from his hand. He froze, the rope moved ever so slightly. Then in the dead silence of the square came the faintest sound imaginable. A breath. Gasps erupted from the men below. She's alive again. One whispered, Dear God. She's still alive. Keller stared in disbelief. Her chest rose slowly, painfully, but unmistakably. Her eyes fluttered open, glazed and bloodshot. Every inch of her body was broken, her neck bruised deep purple. But she lived. The priest was called back. He arrived running, clutching his cross so tightly that his knuckles went white. When he saw her, his legs nearly gave out. No, this cannot be. The Lord would not allow this. Anna's lips trembled. A soft sound escaped her throat, half whisper, half sigh. Why won't he let me go? Those words chilled every man present. The priest stepped back as if she had struck him. She speaks with the devil, he said quickly. That's the only reason death refuses her. The crowd, which had gathered once again, murmured in terror. Mothers pulled their children close. Some fell to their knees, praying. Others stared in awe. To them she no longer looked human. She looked like a spirit caught between heaven and hell, something that neither realm wanted to claim. By dusk the mayor demanded it end, once and for all. If rope and flame cannot kill her, he said, then we must crush the breath from her body. And so they brought stones. Large, rough, heavy. They laid them one by one upon her chest as she lay in the square, still bound by chains. Her breathing grew weaker with each stone. Keller couldn't bear to look. He turned away, trembling, muttering prayers under his breath. The townsfolk watched in silence as the stones piled higher, until her ribs began to crack beneath the weight. Her eyes rolled back. Then finally, her body went still. The priest raised his cross, voice breaking as he declared, "It is done." The curses ended, but no one cheered. No one moved. For a long time they all just stood there, staring at the lifeless form of the woman who would not die. That night, the sky turned black. A storm rolled in, wind shrieking through the streets like 1,000 voices crying out at once. Many took it as a sign. Some said it was God's anger. Others swore it was her soul still wandering. By morning, the stones were gone. No one had moved them. But they were gone, every last one. And where Anna's body had lain, there was only snow, and the faint imprint of her hand pressed into the ground. Panic spread through Brandenburg. People whispered that she had risen again, that her spirit walked among them. Doors were bolted shut, windows boarded. No one dared enter the square after sunset, but Keller, haunted and sleepless, could not stay away. On the second night, he went back to the scaffold alone. He carried only a lantern, the flame flickering in the cold wind. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he climbed the steps. When he reached the top, he froze. There she was. Anna stood in the center of the platform, the rope still around her neck, her hair hanging loose, her eyes half-lidded but alive. The wind blew through her tattered dress, making it ripple like smoke. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Keller whispered, voice trembling, "You should be dead." "I've tried," she replied softly. Her voice was hollow, distant, like it came from far away. "But every time I close my eyes, I wake again. I feel every hour, every pain, every prayer they whisper against me." Keller's heart pounded. "What are you?" "I don't know anymore," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I prayed for mercy and he turned his face away. Maybe this is my punishment, or maybe theirs." She stepped toward him. He stumbled back in fear. But she didn't reach for him. She only looked past him toward the church steeple rising through the fog. "Tell them," she said, "that what they do in God's name is seen." The wind howled and the lantern flickered out. When Keller looked again, she was gone. Only the rope swayed gently in the wind. He ran from the square, his mind breaking, his breath short and ragged. He burst into the church shouting for the priest. But the priest was already kneeling before the altar, trembling, clutching his rosary. "She came to me," he whispered before Keller could speak. "In my dreams, her eyes, they burned with light. She asked why I spoke God's name and acted in his shadow." The priest broke down, his voice cracking. "I think she was never cursed, Johann. I think we were." By the third morning, a fog rolled in so thick that it hid the town completely. When it cleared, the scaffold was empty. The rope hung cut. Some said she had been taken by angels. Others swore they saw her walking beyond the fields, barefoot, her chains dragging behind her. No one followed. For years after, strange things were said to happen in Brandenburg. When winter came, the church bells would ring at midnight on their own. Those who entered the square claimed to feel a heartbeat beneath the ground. Some even said they saw her reflection in the church windows staring out into the snow. Keller left town soon after. He never spoke of her again. But until the day he died, he swore that on the night after her disappearance, he woke to find her standing at the foot of his bed, her face calm and sad. She didn't speak. She only looked at him, then slowly placed a hand over his chest. The next morning, Keller was found dead. His heart had stopped in the middle of the night, but on his chest, pressed faintly into the skin, was the mark of a hand. No one dared touch the scaffold again. It stood for decades, slowly decaying until it finally collapsed under its own weight. Yet even then, no grass grew where it had once stood. Centuries later, when workers rebuilt the town square, they found bones buried beneath the ground, small, delicate, and wrapped in rusted chains. No one could say for sure if they were hers, but the townsfolk still whisper her name every winter. As the snow begins to fall and the nights grow long, they say that if you stand in the square at midnight, you can still hear the faint sound of breathing, soft, steady, endless, the sound of a woman who could not die. And so the legend of Anna Ebeler lived on, the woman whose punishment became eternity itself, whose suffering outlasted her executioners, and whose story haunted a town for generations. Some called it a curse, others called it a miracle, but all agreed on one thing. Death had refused her, not because of evil, but because humanity's cruelty had already done its work. The longest execution in history had ended, but its echo never did. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon to hear more real stories from the shadows of history. And tell me, if you were there that winter night, standing before the woman who could not die, would you have begged for her life to end, or for her soul to be forgiven?